What up, Mafia? Welcome into the Bills Breakdown here by Chat Sports. My name is Moose. It's great to be with you on this Sunday edition of the Bills Breakdown. Now, on today's episode, the draft is over, and that means the undrafted free agents have been leaked to us, so we're going to go through each and every single one so far that the Bills have signed. Starting, of course, with this guy right here, Mr. Hayden Harris, the edge out of Montana. Now, he started 14 out of 15 games in his first year in Missoula, and then made an impact during UM's playoff run. He he posted 32 total tackles, 10 solo, with a career-high 8 against Delaware in the playoffs, logged 2 sacks, 4.5 TFLs, and 4 quarterback hurries and 2 pass breakups. Again, a lot of these players you'll find are kind of dealing with the same thing. Most of these guys are brought in to compete for a spot on the 53-man roster. Most likely, none of these will ever become starters. That's just how UDFAs kind of work. So if you're thinking that there's a diamond in the rough, it's very rare. It does happen from time to time. But for the most part, these guys are going to be brought in to compete for a place on the 53-man roster or the practice squad. Most of them will not end up making the team whatsoever. Up next, Hal Presley, the wide receiver out of Baylor. A little bit about Mr. Presley. Like I said, he did play down there in the Waco area. 31 receptions, 429 yards. Finished with a total of 35.8 yards per game. But in his entire career, over 1,000 receiving yards on 81 catches and 7 touchdowns, averaging 12.9 yards per catch. Again, one of these players that maybe, because the Bills' wide receiver room could use an extra depth piece, could find his way onto the roster, and in a pinch, if somebody gets hurt, he gets called up and has to start a game or at least be a rotational wide receiver. Maybe that happens as well. Next, Jacob Beyer, the center out of Arkansas State. The Bills' offensive line was actually awesome last year. But last year, let's take a look. He had an 81.9 PFF grade, only allowed 1 sack. He's from Grandview, Texas. I like his size, 6'2", 306 pounds. A little bit about him on the scouting report is that he's got nice strength. He's got good hands. The problem with him is he's very sluggish in the feet. Doesn't necessarily have the quickness laterally or the fluidity in his lower half to kind of be a starter at any level. In fact, a lot of what the NFL analysts were saying was that he would be an average backup if he ever reached his full potential. So to me, that just kind of signifies like, hey, if you bring him in, he's got a sweet mullet. Look at that thing. That's the business in the front, party in the back, right? So if you bring him in and he ends up making a spot on the roster, that's good enough to become like a 3rd or 4th rotational center for the Buffalo Bills. Hey, speaking of, can we get 50 new Bills subscribers? Yesterday, we got a ton after our draft grades video. I would love it if you could hit that subscribe button right now. Help us get 50 new ones and reach 4,000 subscribers. We are less than 200 away. Up next, Stephen Gosnell, the wide receiver out of Virginia Tech. Now, I actually did get to watch him play one game last year on ESPN, and the one thing that I did notice about him is that he's a kind of a slot receiver that doesn't have the quickness to play out of the slot. He got 1 catch in the game that I watched him in, and it was like an over-the-middle crossing route for like 6 yards, and that was the last time I saw his name. So again, bringing him in, hopefully could compete to make the practice squad, and if he doesn't, you'll probably never hear his name again. That was Stephen Gosnell out of Virginia Tech. Up next is Kelly, I'm going to try and say this correctly, Akarayi, wide receiver out of Mississippi State. You'll find a trend here. There's a lot of wide receivers that Brandon Beane has signed to compete to try to get another spot here on the 53-man roster. A little bit here about Kelly in just a second. Another wide receiver out of the SEC, Mississippi State, who had a really, really bad 2024. I believe they only won like 2 games, but he's from Irving, Texas, 6 foot, 200 pounds, 25 receptions in 2024 for 391 yards, 2 touchdowns. 49 long is actually pretty good. It means a nice little breakaway player there at the end. But for the most part, as I read a little bit more about, who he is as a player, Played in 35 career games with 25 starts, so he was good enough to at least start at Mississippi State. Finished his career with 1,600 yards, 10 touchdowns. It's not a bad little career there. Made himself, a nice little, statistical average there at Mississippi State throughout his career. So one of the players that I think actually does have kind of a shot to make the roster, but again, wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. Paris Shand, the edge out of LSU. My producer today, Mr. Nick Lopez, was actually telling me that he's an international player, and he's actually from Canada. So I thought he was French at first because LSU, Cajun, the French, it just kind of makes sense, but he's a huge dude. 6'3", 268 pounds, 24 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Kind of lacks that explosiveness and athleticism that you're looking for in a defensive end or an edge. But again, with how much the Bills, added in free agency and in the draft on the defensive side of the ball, I don't see him making the 53-man roster whatsoever. But it would be nice to bring him in and just see how, competition works. Most of these guys travel around trying to make 53-man rosters. You'll see them bounce around from different, teams like the Bills, and then they'll go to Indianapolis and try out. It's just one of the cool things about the NFL is that every once in a while, one of these guys will make a roster and make a good living for themselves. Coming up, we've got more UDFA signings for the Buffalo Bills, and I'm going to do that right after we give a big shout out to our friends over at Fanatics. These draft hats by Fanatics are awesome, and we don't have the Bills one to show you, but this is what they look like, and everybody in the Chat Sports office actually agreed that these were the coolest draft hats we've seen in quite some time, and it's because of that fitted brim. So here's what I've got going on. In the comments and description of today's video, I have got this link right here. If you want to go check out the Buffalo Bills 2025 NFL draft hat, you can do so with that link. We partnered with Fanatics. It's a nice little handshake deal we've got going on with them. And if you want to sport the exact same hat that all of the guys like Maxwell Hairston, Landon Jackson, and TJ Sanders wore the night of their selections, you can do so with our friends over at Fanatics. And thank you, Fanatics, for sponsoring today's video. Now, before we get into our next little UDFA stuff like that, again, I just want to remind you that most of these guys will not find their way onto the 53-man roster. Every so often it happens that they'll make a practice squad player and they'll get called up if there's an injury and you'll see their name. But for the most part, these are just guys that are brought in to compete for those positions. Up next, Daryl Porter Jr., cornerback out of Miami. Now, one of the players actually that I actually know of, I know about 3 of these guys by name because I got to watch a little bit of them play. He's from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, only 5'11", 184 pounds. He did have 7 pass breakups, but the lack of the ball skills and nose for the football is probably why he went undrafted. It's just not one of the strengths of his game. He had 0 interceptions in 2024. So I look at Daryl Porter Jr. as a guy that he's got a little bit of athleticism, got a little bit of speed, and can actually, make disruptions happen. But the problem is he just can't find the plays to make turnovers. So that's why I think he got undrafted. Here's the guy that I know by heart. Kaliki Latu, the tight end out of Washington. This is the only guy that I actually believe could make the roster and find his way onto the football field year one. I did not love his 2024 production, but he's got all of the intangibles and the size that you would want in a tight end. Now, I know we've got Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, so I'm not saying that he's going to make the roster, but he would not shock me as a player that would. Right? Just under 400 yards in 2024. I love his size. I think, when he started his career at Nevada and then transferred to Washington, you saw his career get better and better and better every single year. So I actually think Latu has a shot to make the 53-man roster out of all of these prospects. Keontae Jenkins, a safety out of Virginia Tech. Again, coming in at number 9 for the Buffalo Bills from Jacksonville, Florida, 6'2", 211. So he's got pretty decent size for a safety. With that being said, I did read a scouting report on him. A little bit slower, not as fluid as you would like. Just seems to be one of those career journeymen throughout college. Again, probably not going to end up making the 53-man roster. The one note that I did read about him that was really good is he's a very, very good tackler. So he can hit really, really hard, especially with that 6'2", 211 coming in at a free safety position. Devon Brant Epps. It's actually Devin Brant Epps, excuse me. The defensive tackle out of New Mexico. This is probably the most productive player on this list. I want to read off some stats for you here in just a second because he did have a ton throughout his career, maybe not at New Mexico, but just hear me out with this guy. He played 3 seasons for Old Dominion, which is like a Division 1 FCS school. He had 32 games, 85 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 4 PBUs. So he is able to get that hand up at the line of scrimmage and bat balls down. That's part of the strengths of his game. He's not very fast, he's not very athletic, and he's oversized for the position. Now, these next couple of guys came in as we were getting ready to film this video. So interestingly enough, I should say, there are more and more players being added to this list. When I got in this morning, it was about 11. Now it's at 13. So Wande Owens, the safety out of New Hampshire, he came in and is going to be getting a workout with the Buffalo Bills. Just a little bit about him. 5'11", 205, 111 tackles in 2024 is crazy. But he played for New Hampshire. I don't even know what conference New Hampshire's in. I don't think they're in the Big East. I think they're an FCS program. I could be wrong about that, but I didn't even know New Hampshire had a football team. That I'm going to be completely honest with you about. So all of these guys, like I said, are going to be brought in to compete at the next level. They're doing their best to make the roster, find a way to make a living for themselves. And again, every so often, a diamond in the rough will appear, and they'll make the roster and find their way onto the football field. I can name you one player that you definitely know of that started out like this. Adam Thielen. Brought on to the Vikings practice squad and then eventually worked his way into the starting rotation and became their number 1 wide receiver for at least a couple of years. So let me know. Grade the before that, we're going to go through one more time every single UDFA that we've had. Hayden Harris, Hal Presley, Jacob Bayer, Stephen Gosnell, Kelly Ekiari, Paris Shand, Daryl Porter, Kaliki Latu. Keep your eye on that guy. I like him a lot. Keontae Jenkins, Devin Brant Epps, finds his way onto the field as well. And then they had Wade Owens as well, with Keontae Jenkins rounding out the 11 guys that have made their way onto this list. All right, Bills Mafia, grade the UDFAs. Again, this is really hard to do considering a lot of these players are guys that we don't necessarily know about. So I'm going to give this a solid C. I do like the Keontae Latu one for sure. I think, like I said, he's probably the guy on this that's the most talented and has the best ability to make the starting roster. My name is Moose. As we get further along into the next couple of weeks, we're going to break down every single Bills draft pick going forward and some updated free agent targets after the draft coming up here next week. Until next time, be cool.